You're tuned in to Something to Wrestle After, and this week we're covering WrestleMania 20. Stay tuned.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Something to Wrestle After. This is the show for all you huge fans of Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard out there to come and hang out with us after you've listened to the show. We cover all the big reveals, get your fan reactions, and every once in a while we may be offering our opinions as well.
I think more so now than ever.
And we love that you all have tuned in live on YouTube. Thank you for that. My name is Christy Olson, and these gentlemen joining me here today. We're starting with the guy who runs Bruce Pritchard's YouTube channel and the channels of a lot of your other favorite wrestling veterans. Hello, Steve Kaufman.
Hello, thank you all so much for having me. Also, thank you to the 18,764 who have listened and or watched this episode on youtube.com/somethingtowrestle.
Oh, wow. And that's just a fraction of the fans, I feel like.
That's very much like the millions that watch it, that listen to enjoy the podcast in a week's time.
Including these other two guys right here. He is a film critic, and also you may have seen him making headlines with a Nikki Bella interview this week.
That's right.
Say hello to Jim Alexander.
I'm the fan of the dirt sheets. They're fans of mine. Nikki Bella interview I posted up there, so it's there for people to see.
Listen, some people dissing the dirt sheets. That's a good relationship to have when you're us. And this guy, a wedding DJ, one of the hosts of the Raw after show right here on AfterBuzz TV. Funny guy. I don't know. I could go on, but I won't.
Oh, go ahead.
It's Lobo Boys.
How's it going, everybody? So glad to be part of Something to Wrestle After.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's
Get there.
Well, before we start on a negative note, again, thank you guys for joining us live on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these awesome AfterBuzz TV wrestling and sports after shows and other programming we got for you. And if you'd like to listen instead, I mean, we're pretty cute, but you know, if that's how you roll, you can hit us up on Apple Podcasts. Please leave a review, and we will always shout you out on the show. And with that being said, this week we are covering WrestleMania 20, and the idea for this show was always not necessarily for us to cover what they're covering and give our opinion, but for us to talk about Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard and what Bruce revealed maybe about what was going on behind the scenes, or what we learned from this episode that we didn't know before about these historic events. Not sure that there's going to be a lot of that today.
Well,
we didn't really get much out of Bruce.
Another quick episode.
Yeah, another about minute 30 or so.
Yeah.
Initial reactions just to that. Are you going to defend?
I'm not going to defend.
Just send the direct messages to Steve.
These episodes have been my profession for a long enough time that I'm not gonna lie. When I personally see a 95-minute episode, I edited it 2 times speed. So to me, I'm like, cool. I kind of get a weekend. I kind of get a lesser weekend. Also, when I clip them out, it helped. Because there's noon, I get the clips that are under 5 minutes. I call them micro clips. They happen at noon every day, and then at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. on either side of them, I get longer clips, which are clips over 5 minutes. So there were a lot of micro clips from this episode, which helps get that schedule longer and longer.
So you're telling me that there were some juicy tidbits here.
There are some juicy tidbits that I think will get a lot more traction. I have 7 coming in the next 3 weeks that I pulled that I think will get a lot more traction that way. And I think the more micro clips out of context, because now I'm scheduled up through like September or October.
Okay.
That I think the tinier bits where, like the Tori Wilson, Billy Kidman thing, I think is going to get a lot of traction on its own about 10 days from now, when I air it by itself.
Okay, all right, and I do want to jump into that. I want to get your guys' initial reactions to what's going on with this show first.
What's going on is pretty obvious. We're getting much less of our weekend occupied by Bruce Pritchard. Now it took me like 3 days of car rides to listen to it. Now it's just like 1 car ride to somewhere. It's definitely getting shorter. I just think there's something missing.
Yes.
Bruce still sharing his thoughts and opinions, but it's not that edgy or as free as it was before.
Yeah.
Right. It lacks, I would say, like substance, right?
Yeah, a little bit of punch. I mean, I listen to it on Spotify, it's my preferred podcast platform. So I see a 90-minute episode, I'm like, great. 1.5 speed. It's way better than 3 hour, 4 hour episodes sometimes, especially when it comes out on a work day. But there isn't that bite. Like, yeah, you get the BS from Bruce, but you don't get as many cutaways, you don't get as many characters or gimmicks or really what he felt back there, how he felt he failed or how he could do things better. So it seems very express. It just felt like, okay, in, out, here's your event, and see you next week. And boxgimmicks.com,
Yeah.
We could deduce that maybe Bruce is a little emotionally exhausted. If we were the
literally.
type to speculate, we could say, well,
Physically, probably
Yeah,
too.
I wouldn't be shocked to hear that he was literally exhausted. Like
Right.
that's whatever job he has at the WWE, we know to be very taxing both physically and emotionally. That I don't think he has as much time in his week than he used to.
right, and even just adjusting to the pressure, going from doing completely your own thing, how and when you want to do it, and doing very well at it, to being in an environment that's so controlled and where you have such little freedom, I think was probably a bit of a jolt.
He was at the WWE offices doing this, right, in Connecticut. So that tells you a thing or two.
That's crazy.
Also, I don't want to be so negative, oh, the show is dead, which a lot of those comments exist. And I can't delete them because they're on because they are on conversation. That is a conversation to be had about the show. But I do want to alert those alarmists.
Okay.
Alarm the alarmist.
But we're a part of a community the community is based around this show. So yes, be vocal that, hey, I didn't like this part of the show, or that we didn't get enough insight from Bruce, or that he literally phoned it in. But let him know that in a constructive way of, I'm still down for you. I'm still down for this show you've done and hope you continue to do. But these are my constructive notes for you moving forward. We want WrestleMania 20.
It's disappointment.
Yeah, WrestleMania 20, we were expecting a 3 to 5 hour episode.
It's a big deal.
We didn't talk very much about Kane versus The Undertaker, and I'm like, and I understand we had a whole Undertaker episode, and we've talked about Kane and The Undertaker a lot, although I'd be lying if I said there was a Kane episode, because there isn't. But that's the number one comment. People why isn't there a Kane episode? Every time there's a
Get Mayor
Rikishi,
Glenn in there.
every time there's
Number
a
one?
Rikishi episode or a Muhammad Hassan episode or a Scotty Too Hottie episode, they're like, oh,
Scotty!
but we waiting on the Kane episode.
Yeah.
All right.
Wait, can
Who are these hood rats? Who are yo, where's my Kane episode at?
So many people.
Well, can we speculate as to why that may be? Should we guess? Should we imply? Should we make some stuff
Kane
up?
has been
We always do. Why not?
to quote Conrad, Kane has been on the pole before and has lost to other people.
Oh, okay. So it's not that
He's a
Bruce is
weak one.
No,
unwilling to talk about him for some reason.
No, it's just a matter of when they put him on the pole, something else wins.
But it's one of those loaded polls, like those Cyber Sunday ones. Do you want a chairs match, Hell in a Cell, or a headlock match?
I don't know.
What the-
Sometimes I feel like it was a long time ago, but I remember when Goldust was on the pole, and we got that really epic 4-hour Goldust episode.
Yeah.
That when Bruce introduced the pole that week, it was Goldust, China, X-Pac, and something else. And he literally was like, "Oh, China's gonna win this pole."
Yeah.
I don't even know why we're bothering
That's
with the
what I
pole.
would guess, too.
China's
Yeah.
gonna win this pole, and then Goldust won the pole, and it was, I would argue, a very classic episode of this show.
Yeah.
Because it's the minutia. The minutia is what you really look for in this show. How are we going to spend 4 hours talking about Goldust? And it's actually Goldust was all over the place for a very long time, and cross paths with so many people that gives you so many good stories that you wouldn't really expect.
Is he the Kevin Bacon 6 Degrees? Of the
A little bit.
That's
I
pretty
think
cool.
Jerry Lawler
He's
was like
that
that.
guy.
Jerry Lawler was like that too.
Yeah.
That it was someone who had been around for so long that he interacted with so many people. I remember him and The Miz didn't even come up. And that was a fairly recent thing, but he had a world title. He had a program with The Miz for more than one pay-per-view.
It's true.
Where Jerry Lawler worked with the world champion.
See, still more to talk about what they've said on other episodes
Yes.
than on this one. Okay, so let's get to it though. They set up what was kind of going down at the time for WrestleMania 20 revenue, pay-per-views, live events. Everything's down. we're doing a really good job at turning this on a positive note here.
Right.
They had lost The Rock, they'd lost Steve Austin, and they are in a period of rebuilding at this time. And one of the favorite juicy little things we did get out of this episode, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, was the idea that Tori Wilson and Billy Kidman's relationship was causing problems backstage. Tori had done a second Playboy or something, and people were saying, or Conrad was asking Bruce, was it true that maybe people thought she was being too big for her britches, or this relationship was causing problems? And Bruce shot that down hard.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that's was his big outburst.
Well, at least from his perspective.
Yeah.
And said that from my perspective and from my understanding, that does not sound right to me.
No, not at all. Anytime you bring up Tori Wilson's name to anyone, they will go on and on about how great she is, how nice she is to anyone and everyone. We were just talking to Bischoff about her a couple weeks ago. Not just to people she has to be nice to, but to anyone and everyone in a meet and greet situation. How hard she works is also another thing that always comes up about Tori. And even when Conrad started asking, I was like, this is going to be one of those dirt sheet debunks.
Well, why does that rumor always persist then? I feel like everyone does say it's positive, but why is that thing like, I don't know about her, she's kind of onto her head, she's a bad person? Why
Because
is
it was in a
Jealousy,
dirt sheet, because it still exists on a dirt sheet
Well, yeah,
from several years
as a
ago.
thing from record, and it's funny now because I feel, and I know nothing. However, if I were Jackie Gaeta, let's say, and I wanted Tori Wilson if Tori Wilson getting taken down a peg helped my payday, and I could give information to Wade Keller anonymously that isn't false. Because nothing that was said was outright false. She did get a second pay-per-view thing. She was very close to Billy Kidman and his career. And, like, if she were to paint a picture that made Tori Wilson look like a diva that wound up in Wade Keller, the Torch, right?
Yeah.
That, like, wound up in the Torch at that time, that could potentially hurt Tori and then help her. Jackie Gaeta is an example. I have no idea, but like any woman on that roster.
That's so true. And people would salivate at that because it is different from what they usually hear, and just because it's about Tori Wilson.
Like we talked about the whole Playboy thing, what a big deal it is for them to do that. So that was like the thing. You got the WrestleMania spotlight. Without the Playboy thing, I don't think that quick 4-minute match even exists, right? At that point. So that's a big deal. There's going to be haters in so many ways. And I mean, you even see the reaction now from the tweets and everyone when Tori Wilson got announced to the Hall of Fame. It's all so positive. Everyone's saying how nice she was and how loved, how she deserved it. And fellow of the women who were in her era, like you're hearing from. So it's just been positive reaction. I just think like, for me, Tori Wilson's like, you can take the girl out of Boise, Idaho, but you know, she's still Boise in a lot of ways.
That's so true. Although she told me once when I interviewed her, she was like, if there would have been cameras rolling, I was asking her about Total Divas, and she was like, if there would have been cameras rolling back in the day when I was on the road with those girls, it was so crazy. And like, she would not elaborate. I tried so hard. But can you imagine if we could hear some of those stories? She's one that should do a podcast.
Girl, what did Ivory say? I want to know. We know it was Ivory.
I love it. I love it.
I just want an Ivory. I want a podcast specifically with Ivory and Candice Michelle, and they just talk trash. Ivory, Candice Michelle, and like two bottles of champagne and all the orange, just mimosas with the ladies.
Wow.
Maybe they call Sonny in jail. What? I'm serious. I want to talk to Sonny from jail.
We were talking about this.
But as far as what went down before the pay-per-view that they're talking about, that was pretty much the only juicy thing. We got a little background on what was going on with Goldberg, but we know all about that. He was on his way out. The little more adding context to the whole Mania thing is that this was the same year as Janet Jackson's little snafu at the Super Bowl. And so the FCC, who's the FCC going to look at? They're like, somebody's going to try to copy this. Someone's going to capitalize on this.
They looked for very easy targets, and what Bruce didn't bring up was the easiest target for the FCC was actually Howard Stern.
At that time,
in 2004, this is what led Howard Stern to satellite radio. Was that the FCC started coming after him, and he really had to question, because his whole thing was shock and awe. So it wasn't that like what he was doing violated like what the FCC considers decent, because that's a political.
Right.
That's a political nightmare.
Yeah.
It's a matter of like, well, why don't I just do something that the FCC doesn't have regulation over? So the air as it exists on the radio, FCC had jurisdiction, whereas satellite radio, they didn't. He just went away. Whereas the WWE decided, well, if we're going to be on something the FCC has jurisdiction and we have no ability to go elsewhere, we should probably just abide by what the FCC wants.
And that's a whole other discussion with FCC, frequency versus content, and that's just,
if they even actually had jurisdiction.
Right, yeah, exactly. Civics class.
Interesting. Very interesting. Also, do you guys remember when it was announced that The Rock and Mick Foley would be in a tag team together?
Yeah. It was.
What was your reaction?
One of the funky ones. It's like, well, you know, it's together they were funny, but you never think of them as like the pantheon of great tag teams. But definitely their chemistry was undeniable. Like I think to them together was definitely the comedy gimmick that wasn't fully a farce, which I totally enjoyed. So.
I thought it was a splashy choice for a WrestleMania return for The Rock.
Yeah.
Because I think looking back, it ultimately helped where he was in his career. He couldn't have been in a spot. He couldn't have been in a like featured spot like he was with John Cena for 2 years.
Yeah.
So he needed to be in something where he would pop a number. Everyone would enjoy the segment, but it ultimately didn't matter very much. Also, The Rock comes back and loses to people in tag matches at Madison Square Garden. Because I believe it was Team Rock and Cena versus Team Miz, like way later, that The Rock came back and Team Miz won. Like it was Team Miz and R-Truth and like a bunch of people out of Survivor Series that The Rock came back. And like The Rock really cares about this business so much that he came back and lost to Evolution, who all became world champions.
Well, I think they had to lose because you were getting Rock and Mick Foley maybe for Rock for sure for a one-off in a lot of ways, and Mick Foley for a very short period or just a return after being out for so many. Evolution, that was the future, and you had to put him over, and who better to put him over than these two legends in a lot of ways and fan favorites. Yeah. So I thought that was the perfect match. The Rock and Sock connection coming together and putting him against Evolution, putting over Evolution. This was kind of the first glimpse of Batista and Orton, what they would become later on.
And Jim, something else I wanted to ask you about is this idea that the USA Today report on wrestler deaths is coming out, right? Were you as surprised as I was that WWE is not at all concerned about that?
In a lot of ways,
that could be incredibly damaging.
At the time, when we're talking about this time period, no, because it was a different era. I think if it came out now, there'd be a lot more ESPN stories being picked up about it. Back then, like Bruce kind of dismissed it really quick. I mean, strongly in a lot of ways, too. He's like, oh, well, they're talking about like 80-year-old guys or guys that was like, no, there's a lot of guys. Brian Pillman was very not long removed,
there would be plenty of relevant examples.
He was not old or 80 or anything like that. Yeah. So he kind of really dismissed that unfairly, I felt, in a lot of ways. But at the time, I think there wasn't such a public, in a sense, outcry or even knowledge of it, like the concussions are now. So back in the day, they could have, in a way, tried to sweep it under a rug or not acknowledge it.
I also think he incorrectly characterized the article as it pertained to the WWE, where it was like, oh, they're saying that the WWE is killing all these guys. And it's like, no, they're saying the wrestling business is, which is actually, and I think the company line at that time was, well, most of these people weren't our employees when they died. Most of these...
We've heard Bruce say that on this show.
Well, he literally said that on this show, that it didn't happen on our watch. And like it wasn't that much long later that Kurt Angle went to TNA, partially because, according to the dirt sheets, that they didn't want that to happen. That with Kurt Angle specifically, and it's a weird thing. You kind of hear the murmurs of in this that it's WWE lets people go before something like what happened with Eddie happens or Chris happens, where it actually does happen on their watch.
Yeah.
But it is, I don't know, I think there was a lot of credence even then to the idea that the wrestling industry is such a factor in so many young athletes dying in like just this sudden way that as an industry, I don't know, like I think WWE worked very hard internally to fix this problem, but still were able to tout the line of, well, I mean, Pillman, at that point, Pillman would be the one clear-cut. Pillman and Owen Hart would be the two clear-cut examples. And everybody else, oh, well, yeah, they worked for us.
Yeah, I think to that point, whereas what kind of weakened the argument against the wrestling business, as opposed to, say, the NFL, is that there wasn't one boogeyman. It wasn't just concussions. It was like injuries, drug use, maybe steroids for a different generation, even concussions or even that thing too. So which one do you attack at once? And it's very easy to dismiss and be like, well, it's just a occupational hazard. Things happen.
What was their drug policy back then and all that it is now? It was nowhere near as strong as it is now.
They're still traded, but I don't think it was nearly as stringent as it was now.
No, now you legitimately get suspended even if you're top of the card, if there's any violations or anything like that. Back then, I don't know.
Yeah, we saw that recently with, reportedly, with Alicia Fox.
Reportedly.
But going back to WrestleMania 20, this one opened up in a kind of a unique way. It's the first time we see a fourth generation McMahon on the show. We got the Harlem Boys Choir. Do you guys think that wrestling fans, or as wrestling fans, do you give a crap about the way the show opens? Like, is it important
America
that it
the
sets a
Beautiful
tone?
And all that? Yeah.
Or do you just want to see some wrestling?
Are you asking me personally?
mean,
Because
whoever.
I am.
You seem like you would feel
I
strongly
am
about
like-
this.
Yes,
Bubba.
I am. I feel like you can pop in any video after No Way Out 2004, and you can see a complete uptick in the quality of the video packages. Like for me,
Oh, yeah.
the theme music selection, the graphics, the design, even when they go back to the same venue year after year, like SummerSlam, for example, I tune in for that. That's actually part of the presentation. That is like the commercials for the Super Bowl WrestleMania. So seeing the fourth generation McMahon itself, all right, it's a baby, cool. But the idea, they took an idea and said, we're going to reboot this, and this is a new generation, but we're back where we started, to me, it was like, perfect. Yeah.
I do like when the WWE, which has some of the best production people in the world, consistently making 52 weeks a year worth of television on a very tight deadline.
Yeah.
To really let those people creatively flow on what is the story of our night. And I really thought WrestleMania 20 was one of the better told stories of the night, especially since we're talking about you lose Rock, you lose Austin. The first guy out is John Cena. Like Randy Orton and Batista win, and then like Eddie and Chris are on the top of the card.
We
like
had
you
more
really
backstage interactions and saw more of that thing.
You
than we
get
usually do
you get
during
the
show.
return of a hybrid Undertaker, because we talked a lot about this on the Undertaker episode, that you had the purple wearing dead man wrestling zombie, and then you had the biker coming out to Limp Bizkit if you saw it live.
And Ministry,
Like
where's the
American-
Ministry Undertaker in between?
The Ministry Undertaker is pre-American Badass
Right.
Undertaker,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that Undertaker was still definitely a wrestling zombie. And then he got buried for the second or third time, literally. And then he became...
Isn't it his match, though? Okay, go ahead.
But it is his match, and he always loses. And then he eventually comes back. But him coming back and facing Kane was the first time he was a hybrid of the wrestling zombie, but Mark the guy who's a biker and like a badass. And you got both. And then that was we got, I think 10 years, more than 10 years worth of that Undertaker. And that was a reboot of The Undertaker. It was a reboot of a lot of people, a lot of feuds.
Yeah.
At a time where they desperately needed to rebrand and re-understand who's the future.
And as we're talking about Undertaker, I remember, was it last week, right, that the gongs went off during
or
this
2
show?
weeks,
2 weeks ago,
yes.
just for no reason, random gongs out of nowhere. Do you have any insider information, Steve Kaufman,
I have
as to
no
whether
insider-
Dead Man Talking is happening?
I have no insider information. I will say Matt Kuhn was the audio engineer of this podcast, of the Something to Wrestle podcast for a long time. He also does stuff with Vince Russo now. He also has his own podcast that Conrad came on, and Conrad said there's no more to it. He didn't talk about the gong so much as he talked about registering the trademark. Other than I tried to register the trademark so I can get it, because I know StarCast is doing some business with The Undertaker, and we haven't really put any more thought into it than that.
And it's just a genius name.
Well, yeah, like once again, he registered for it. He didn't get it.
Right.
He has yet to.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
He's
yeah,
yet
yeah.
to be given it.
Right.
He only registered for it.
Okay.
So-
You can't say much about it, right?
Yeah. Well, and also, I don't know. I stand by where we were. Like, do we really think?
Yeah, no, still think
No,
it's definitely
he's
not
not
happening.
talking.
Just
That
wanted to
man's
see
not talking.
If you could really put it to rest.
I think Conrad has built a pretty decent live show mechanism that if the WWE will allow Mark to come and do a show called Dead Man Talking, but like a literal put your phones in a bag show.
Yeah.
And I was just at the Improv last night. They've perfected that technology that they make you put your phone in a bag that locks, and then the lock is on the other side of the door. So that you literally hey, you're free to use your phone if you leave the room, and we'll unlock it for you. So if you could do something like that and literally say you cannot use your phone for this show. I wouldn't be shocked if WWE would let him do it under, probably that would be one of the major guises, is that it's not recorded by anyone, and that it's just Conrad, Mark, and the crowd that's there.
Right.
I don't know. That's a selling point. Conrad has a lot of people who want to book a lot of stuff, and presumably no more Bruce. That might be an option he has if WWE will allow it, or if Mark wants to leave, which the first one seems more likely.
Well, one guy who's probably never going to host a podcast or leave WWE is John Cena. And this show opened with a big U.S. title match. Oh, this is one of those millions of times John Cena won the title, the U.S. title.
This meant a lot at the time.
Right, but Bruce didn't say hardly anything about it. He was like,
Right.
oh, yeah, they told a good
Big
story.
show. Yeah, he
Check.
was there. Huh?
Yep.
This was, and y'all can,
His first title, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Also, it was, and y'all can check me on this, the greatest WrestleMania opening match ever. In the history of WrestleMania, this was the best first match.
Wow, that's a hot take.
Really?
I don't know
The
what
best
to
WrestleMania. Get at me in the comments if I'm
At
wrong.
me, bro.
This is the best WrestleMania opener in the history of WrestleMania.
Didn't Daniel Bryan opening his Triple H one WrestleMania? That
He
few years
did, but
back
this
in
was
New
better.
Orleans?
He did, but this was better.
Really? I thought that was...
Also, the opening segment of that one was the Hogan Austin.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The
Segment.
Hogan
Yep,
Austin
yep.
Rock, where
Yeah.
Austin didn't stun everyone, and I unsubscribed.
What
to
was
his
that?
podcast.
WrestleMania 27, 28? The Edge's last match against Del Rio.
That might have been
Was
an
that a
open-
good match though?
I don't remember. Probably not. If I can't remember.
Exactly. Like this was a good match, told a good story, and like the fact that Big Show's still there and that John Cena is John Cena. Sure. Aside and like the match and the story, I think. Come at me.
Is John Cena the
I'll
greatest U.S.
defend this.
champion of the WWE version of the title? Is that too hot of a take? Do you think?
Carlito. No, I think.
Listen, Cena and Big Show better just be glad that Team Bad and Blonde versus Team Total Divas was on the pre-show and didn't open WrestleMania 32, okay? Because otherwise he would have some competition.
6 stars.
And speaking of competition, how about a 4-way tag team title match? There's
Player.
2 of them on this card. And Bruce says, this is just a way of getting as many names out there as possible. And I don't have a problem with that.
Payday.
It's the biggest and it's the grandest stage of them all or whatever. Let everybody get an opportunity. Who cares if it's not great?
This
Forgot
isn't
about
the,
Jindrak. You forgot he
I mean,
existed.
this is not the forum for me to rant on how WWE mishandles tag team wrestling. So
There's a lot of places a lot of people you can talk to about that if you
Also,
want to, I'm pretty sure.
there are a lot of links of me ranting pretty extensively about, and I think this is one of the indicative things, that one of those teams was literally Booker T and Rob Van Dam paired together, beating a bunch of actual tag teams.
And just the fact that ring psychology-wise, it's completely illogical. And I've always thought that. Even before I didn't know about wrestling, even just as a casual fan, I was like, but why would he do that? That doesn't make sense.
I'm just spent. Whew.
Right?
Can you handle this, bro? I'll come back in later.
I want you guys to have a chance, too. All right, let's talk about Jericho and Christian fighting
I
over
love that.
Trish. You do? Is this one of your
Love
faves?
that. That's one of my top 10 WrestleMania memories.
Oh, yeah?
Really?
Of all time. Yeah, that was, at the time, that angle was hot. That was a hot angle
was.
that was going on for a while. And I didn't see that turn. And we knew Trish as the kind of the everyone's favorite, lovable Trish. And I didn't see a heel turn that. And when she kissed Christian and she wiped her lip afterwards. Oh my God, that was such a moment on top of that. Man, I will remember. For me, that was a WrestleMania moment. That put Christian over big time, too. I thought Christian arrived as a major player because he was always the Edge's sidekick. And he was trying to make his own kind of career with Edge being out with a neck injury. That, for me, established Christian. And you can look, going forward, he became a legitimate mid-carder to main event talent after that. I thought it was a huge WrestleMania moment, very memorable.
Yeah, and I think Jericho sold it too. The emotion, bro. Like you felt a real heartbreak. But to your point, it was awesome. And I'm a big Christian fan, huge.
Just when I bring it up for you to
Heel
get that
Trish.
excited.
Heel Trish
It's
was
like
so
radio
cool.
packages and Christian and
Like, that's what wrestling is. That's what it means. That's what should be. That's what a WrestleMania match should give to people, is that kind of excitement and memory.
Good match, too, by the way.
Also like a slight 04 WWE style of feminism. They were fighting over her as if she were an object, and then she flipped the script on them.
Yep.
Right.
Very
Like
much
that,
so.
that was as close to feminism as you would get from the WWE in 04.
It was a long time ago.
Very blow match.
Since we're kind of in the natural progression of things, the women's match, so this would be... Sable had 3 wins at WrestleManias.
Yeah.
I mean, I know she had to put up with a lot of other stuff.
Did Brock have anything to do with
Pretty
this?
good record.
A Hall of Famer Sable right there.
Yeah.
But the second match, Molly and...
Victoria?
Victoria.
Yes, Victoria and Molly. That was not your traditional at this time women's match. We got that with the other one. And then you got some real good women's wrestling, right?
Yeah. I think that to me was WWE testing it out in their labs, right? They didn't quite have the staff or the roster to do it with, but they really felt like you can't live on GoDaddy models forever, right? And I think showing that showcase at WrestleMania was a start of saying, hey, we're more open to trying new things.
And Molly Holly, man.
Oh, she's
can we
amazing.
say enough good about her now and what she's doing now, training in Minneapolis? I forget Penn's school, right?
It's her and Daivari, right?
Yeah. I mean, she's incredible.
Favorite diva of that time.
Wow.
She doesn't give a lot of interviews, but we did have her Skype into X-Buck 12360 a couple years ago. Very revealing. So make sure you go back and give that a listen. There you go. There you go. Give it a watch. You may see a familiar face. All right. You guys mentioned a little bit what was going on with Evolution and the Rock and Sock Connection. Any other thoughts about that match when you went back and watched it again?
I disagree with Mick Foley. Mick Foley says he didn't like this match.
Yeah, he's made no
He's made no qualms about not liking this match. He felt like they didn't give him enough time. They were building towards that. There are a lot of stories like that about Mick Foley post his pre-retirement, if you will, because he had a retirement and then came back a bunch. Mm-hmm. I thought his work with Randy Orton is. If for nothing else, I thought his work with Randy Orton was better than this whole match. Mm-hmm. But this match was what it was. It was kind of a play the hits, and and then subvert expectations. Because you would have Rock and Sock Connection come out, get the nostalgia pop. Mm-hmm. The Rock comes out, Mick Foley comes out, and then presume they would beat but shine up the newer guys. And that's not what happens. You subvert that expectation. No, the newer guys win because they're amazing and they're going to continue to be amazing.
Right. Do you think it's just with Mick that he's used to having, falling off a cage and just doing all this stuff that makes such a huge splash that do you see him as someone who's sort of back in the day it was so great and I used to, jump off the tops of buildings and if he doesn't do that then he's disappointed?
I'll mind my words, but I do think him as a wrestler always felt and a storyteller always felt the need to escalate to the natural progression, which for him meant falling off a giant cage or doing this or doing that. Whereas in 04, later in his career, he couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So he will always be disappointed because he'll be unable to deliver on what he felt. And he keeps trying bell to bell just in the ring, I should be able to do it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a frustration he's had in the later parts of his career.
Well, again, as a performer too, doing stand-up, there's always the dynamic of doing new material versus classic stuff.
Yeah.
And you want to try to do things to push yourself forward. And if someone goes, hey, do those 4 or 5 jokes you like, and then they cut you a minute off time, you're like, I feel empty. Whereas the validation of I've given my character out there. So, I mean, that's why I understand why he doesn't like it, but as a viewer, I love the match. It was cool.
Yeah. And I like how the perspective you just gave to it there. It makes it seem noble. He just wants to give the people a good show. Oh, we love that, Mick Foley. All right, let's talk about the painful, quote-unquote painful, according to Bruce, Goldberg, Lesnar. Steve Austin is the referee. I mean, this is one of those infamous matches.
Yeah.
Is that the word we'd use for this one?
Yeah, it gets remembered for nothing. But on paper, this is a iconic WrestleMania match. You see Goldberg, the guy, the face of WCW, going against that new face of WWE at the time. This was on paper a monumental, never before seen sort of clash. It's like seeing Jordan go against LeBron in a lot of ways. In some ways, I mean, if you compare to brands, WCW versus WWE.
Yeah.
And to get this out of that shows. I'm always wondering if this was in another city, if it wasn't in New York, Chicago, or Philadelphia, would they have responded? If this was somewhere in, let's say, South Carolina or North Carolina, would the crowd respond differently and the whole thing would have gone differently? They were in New York, they'll let you know no matter what. Mm-hmm. Had this could have been changed. I wonder if it was in a different city, but it will be remembered for the booing and just stare downs.
I wonder
our resident New York guy.
Yeah, because you know what? I really felt like those guys didn't earn the posturing and the air, the space that they were trying to do, because everyone knew they were leaving. They had to have gone bell to bell and start going at each other, much like Goldberg's other appearance when he came back. The fact you're doing that and people know you're leaving, it looks like. Almost like you're not even giving people 100%. You're just kind of how can I wind this down? And so we know Stone Cold, he's cool. He suns people. Cheer for that guy. And it totally broke down.
I would also argue WrestleMania exists on a separate timeline from all the other pay-per-views. Mm-hmm. So there are people who watch WrestleMania that don't watch wrestling, similar to how there are people who will watch Super Bowl.
Tons
people
of
who watch the Super Bowl
fans
who don't watch football.
Oh, yeah.
It's an American tradition in that sense. So to those people, the casual viewer, if you were to mention Goldberg to them, they think the ideal, perfect, never-before-seen opponent to Goldberg is Steve Austin.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So to put them in the same ring and then to not have that match which I understand Steve Austin was done by that point, whether we all knew it for sure or not. Like, we learned later that was Steve Austin was long gone. He had a tag match 2 years prior. That was it. You're already disappointing that audience. Then the crowd is being so vocal that they're going to have to be explained to by someone else in the room, like myself, who would have known what was happening, of why the crowd doesn't care about this match, and be told, like, well, both of them are leaving. Also, as on-screen characters, both Brock Lesnar and Goldberg in the 6 months heading into this were not very good characters.
Right.
Not very well-written characters. I believe it was either Goldberg or Brock Lesnar who had literal TV dates written into their contract, and they were done. Like, they didn't have any more TV appearances written. To give, so, like, you have to promote it without them. And this was before they trusted Paul Heyman to do that. Because nowadays that's the same with Brock Lesnar. That I think they have to, like, get leaked. They have to pay him $500,000 just to show up.
Right.
Which is why they pay Paul Heyman an annual salary.
A small
that's
fraction?
Yeah, like, I would say Paul Heyman makes double that.
Oh yeah, no,
I
I'm
would
sure
say
he
Paul
does,
Heyman makes millions a year, but he gets to turn up.
Yeah.
And they get to save $500,000 by not having Brock Lesnar.
Well, that's what was going on with the big guys. How about the cruiserweights? This is not something that is it just that WWE can't figure out how to do cruiserweights?
I guess, or just weren't that important at the time. I mean, you have so many big names and stars. It's WrestleMania. Let's just give these guys a payday, throw them out there. It's equivalent now. They would have done the Andre the Giant Battle Memorial, Battle Royal. Back then, it's just like, let's squeeze these guys into the ring.
Cruiserweights were so strong in WCW. WCW really did a good job of introducing it and making it work. And I just can't think of any time in WWE where I would say the Cruiserweights division worked.
Yeah.
And not because of the performers.
Of course.
Oh, no, never.
I would say 205 Live now is doing a better job of doing what the Cruiserweights worked for on Nitro, which is you have to treat them separate but equal. You have to, because it's a separate division. You have to treat the Cruiserweight division as a division and have very minimal to no commingling. And then but the problem is, how do you build up a division of guys that are roughly the same weight, size, and style of everyone else on your card? WWE does it best now with 205 Live, because the 205 Live guys rarely, if ever, appear on Raw. 205 Live is a show. It's its own division. It's a show about its own division. Whereas Chavo Guerrero, like, if you really run down the list of people in this Battle Royal, Chavo Guerrero became a heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
I don't remember enough of the names to really be able to go.
Chavo was there. Billy
Dragon,
Kidman,
Endless
Funaki,
Cape.
Jamie Noble, Nunzio, Rey Mysterio, Shannon Moore, Tajiri, and Ultimate Dragon.
Yeah.
Two for sure of them became heavyweight champions.
Right.
And that's just difficult. How do you, like, that's a problem. That's a problem we probably could have. We will probably get to ask Eric in a later date of how do you deal with a division,
Like a Mustafa Ali type of situation.
Like, how do you explain Mustafa Ali jumping from 205 to heavyweight
without giving the audience the idea that being on Raw and being a heavyweight is better than being a cruiserweight?
or bogging them down on someone's weight, because they don't want to do that either, because they want Buddy. I guarantee if you weighed Buddy Murphy today, he'd be 215. And he'd have cut. He'd have cut to be 215.
I think the two biggest problems historically that I can think of is, one, the cruiserweight division was always on the C show, Velocity, Jacked, Metal, or whatever. And second of all, because of the similar weight and size and classes, their personas, gimmicks were one-dimensional. Oh, he wears the mask. Oh, this guy's from Japan. That guy's Mexican. Okay?
All right, we got it.
Yeah.
Now we know who to root for. Thank you so much.
Right.
All right. Well, guys, I apologize. I haven't done a great job of keeping us on time today. So you got to offer up your final thoughts on this one kind of quick. I apologize. Jim?
Okay, we'll start with me. Very memorable WrestleMania. I know Bruce and everyone was really high on it, talking about being one of the greatest. I wouldn't say one of the greatest, but I think it was the glimpse of the future. Like, we talked about this setup for the future. I think that this future lasted only 1 year, because WrestleMania 21 was the real beginning of the future. That's where that's where John Cena and Batista were born, and that transformed the next generation. I think this was the transitional part from Austin, Brock, Goldberg moving on to 1 year. It was like buying that time for John Cena and Batista. So I remember that WrestleMania as being the transitional, where the guys that never got to shine, like Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, got recognized, and that was their time for that 1 year.
I look back at this WrestleMania very fondly as unnecessary WrestleMania. And from a business standpoint, to look at, like, if you were to take a random 10-year swath, this might not have been bell to bell one of the better WrestleManias, but that's what you should be judging a company and a story and a business on, is what does your middle of the road WrestleMania look like? As a middle of the road WrestleMania, this is amazing.
Yeah, not bad.
I think that's fair. I think that of the late era arena WrestleManias, it does stick out as one of the stronger ones. But to Jim's point, 21 was pretty strong too. I always look back at it fondly. Watching it back today, some of the kinks are starting to get in there a bit. But overall, I think it's a positive WrestleMania. Sure.
All right. Well, we are going to also get Bruce's thoughts on WrestleMania 10 next week. And then WrestleMania 17. Conrad said they're also going to be covering King Kong Bundy. Michael P.S. Hayes, I can't wait for that one. And that they are going to get to Steve Austin's 1998.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of plans for a show that we don't know what's going forward, okay?
Yeah.
Let's just stick with WrestleMania 10 and 17. That's all we're guaranteed right now.
All right, guys. Well, if they want to reach out to you on social media, Jim, where do they do that at?
You can reach me at TheJimAlexander and RealTalker.com. That's REL Talker. You can see my interview with Nikki Bella.
And I'm Steve Kaufman. You can find me on Twitter almost exclusively at Steve Kaufman. That is KAUFMANN. I'm involved in a lot of YouTube pages. I tweet the link. Support me by supporting them.
That's awesome. At Flobo Voice on Twitter, at Flobito on Instagram, and Flobito.com.
You guys can always hit me up at Christy Reports. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Our founder, Keven Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.